The amitriptyline, I figured, would help them sleep so they wouldn't wake up and feel nothing. And the potassium chloride was supposed to stop their heart. You know, no pain, no nothing, just... I don't think he knew. I think that the amitriptyline, he just kind of, you know, whined, "Mama, Mama."
A nurse trained to save lives made a choice so horrifying it put her on death row faster than almost anyone before her. She was trusted in hospital halls, but behind closed doors, her past and pain quietly shaped a future no one saw coming.
Nurse Christina Riggs, convicted of smothering her 2 young children to death in 1997.
If I'd only reached out and told somebody what I was feeling or thinking.
And here's where the story really begins. Long before the crime. Christina Marie Riggs was born in Lawton, Oklahoma, and raised around Oklahoma City, but raised might be too generous a word. By her own later accounts, her childhood was unstable, marked by emotional neglect and trauma that never really healed. She told investigators she was sexually abused by a relative, something she carried in silence for years. By the time she was a teenager, she was already self-medicating: cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, anything to dull the noise in her head. At just 16, Christina became pregnant. She carried the baby to term, then gave the child up for adoption. It wasn't something she talked about openly, but people close to her said it stayed with her, lingering like unfinished business. That early mix of trauma, loss, and responsibility shaped how she saw herself and motherhood long before she ever had Justin or Shelby. And the scary part, most people around her never saw any of this coming. This is the part that fooled almost everyone. Despite everything behind her, Christina did something that looked like a comeback. She went back to school, earned her license as a practical nurse, and started working in healthcare. First home care jobs, then eventually positions in hospitals, including a veterans facility. On paper, it looked like stability, a young woman rebuilding her life, helping people, doing meaningful work. Co-workers later described her as reliable, calm, and professional, the kind of nurse you'd trust without hesitation. She showed up, she did the job, she blended in. No dramatic outbursts, no red flags screaming for attention. If anything, she looked like someone holding it together through sheer discipline. But here's the unsettling truth. Sometimes stability is just a mask. And in Christina's case, the routine, the uniform, and the responsibility, none of it fixed what was already breaking underneath. It only hid it better. And this is where the pressure really starts to show. In 1991, Christina became pregnant again. This time, she kept the baby. Her son, Justin Thomas, was born in June 1992. The father was gone before the pregnancy even settled in. Not long after, Christina met a man named John Riggs. They married, and for a moment, it looked like she finally had the structure she'd been missing. In December 1994, their daughter, Shelby Alexis, was born. 2 kids, a husband, a job. From the outside, it looked like a full life. But inside the home, things were unraveling. Christina later claimed John was abusive toward Justin, saying she once saw him punch the boy in the stomach. Whether others saw it or not, that moment stayed burned into her memory. She left the marriage soon after and moved with the kids to Sherwood, Arkansas, closer to her mother. Now she was alone. No partner, long hospital shifts, 2 very young children, and no real support system. People saw a tired single mom doing her best. What they didn't see was the exhaustion turning into isolation, and isolation slowly becoming something much darker.
I can't say exactly when the kids became a part of it, but I was sitting there thinking, well, who's going to take care of the kids when I'm gone? Because up until this point, all I ever heard, just my son had ADHD, and people who would take care of him were always like, he's a handful, he wears me out, he does this, he does that, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I get calls from the daycare. Mom was keeping them in the evening times, and she was always just so exhausted. And so in my mind, nobody wanted them.
This part is uncomfortable, but it matters. Christina's thinking began to spiral in ways that didn't make sense to anyone but her. She became fixated on the idea that no one wanted her children. Justin had been diagnosed with ADHD, and she took every complaint to heart. Daycare calls, people saying he was too much, even her own mother being worn down from helping. In her mind, these weren't small struggles. They became proof that her kids were a burden, proof that if something happened to her, they'd be passed around, unwanted, and separated because they had different fathers. Depression doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers lies until they sound like facts. Christina later said she felt overwhelmed, empty, and convinced she was failing them. The fear wasn't just about herself anymore. It was about what she believed awaited her children without her. And once that belief settled in, it began to twist everything. And then came the day that sealed it all. Christina went to work like any other hospital shift on November 4th, 1997. She arrived, worked, and interacted with coworkers. Her conduct gave nothing about alarm. Still, she had crossed a boundary inside. Christina grabbed drugs from the hospital before leaving. Morphine, potassium chlorides, a bottle of antidepressant pills. Drugs intended to relieve agony or preserve life are now used for something unthinkable. Not a big goodbye. No warnings were given, just another nurse quitting a shift. She next traveled to Shelby and Justin's mother's home. Her mother had an inexplicable, odd feeling that something was wrong. Christina shrugged it off, gave the money owed, and went with the children. It seemed natural to everybody watching, but in Christina's head, the choice was already determined. Ahead, this wasn't a terrible evening. This was the conclusion she had intended. And here, the narrative becomes unbearable. Christina did everything that evening the usual way. She fed Shelby and Justin, played with them, talked quiet. Nothing sped, nothing hectic. She was, if anything, less agitated than usual. That information would later haunt everyone who learned about it. When it was bedtime, she tucked them in gently, kissed their forehead, fixed their bedding. Justin turned 5. Shelby had not even yet 2. She was smiled upon, totally confident, completely safe, or so they thought. Christ told Justin he might get sweets at about 10 p.m. as a reward. He didn't hesitate. Shelby did not either. A huge dose of antidepressants was hidden within, enough to knock them out. Then she remained there, watching quietly for the pills to start to work. There was no outburst of feeling, absolutely not second thoughts, only silence. As the tablets began to work, a cold quiet spread over the flat. This was not anarchy. This was systematic. The most frightening aspect is not what followed, but rather how regular everything seemed just before it did. And that is what makes this evening so challenging to grasp.
After I laid Justin down in the bed, in my bed, I used a pillow and suffocated.
However, the story didn't end as Christina had planned. Afterwards, Christina wrote farewell letters to her mother, her sister, and her ex-husband. Then she swallowed dozens of pills, injected potassium chloride into herself, and collapsed beside the bed where her children lay. The next day, November 5th, her mother, Carol, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When she entered the apartment that afternoon, the scene stopped her in her tracks. Her grandchildren were dead. Christina was still breathing. Carol called 911 immediately. Paramedics rushed Christina to the hospital. She survived. Her children did not. And once the pieces came together, there was no turning back. Detectives found syringes, empty pill bottles, traces of morphine and potassium chloride, and the letters. Everything pointed in one direction. Christina's family hired an attorney who ordered police not to question her without him present. Police ignored that request. Christina Riggs was found guilty on all counts. Capital murder. The sentence was death. But what stunned the courtroom came next. Christina didn't fight it. She didn't beg for mercy. She didn't want appeals. She stood there and said she wanted to die. She gave up every chance to delay the execution, one appeal after another, until nothing stood in the way. Her reasoning was simple and chilling. She wanted to be with her babies. And this time, she was determined not to survive.
No matter how you sugarcoat it, no matter she was depressed, she was this, she was that, doesn't make up for the fact that I took 2 innocent people's lives that were my babies.
And then came the end she had been waiting for. On her final day, Christina declined visitors. Her last meal was simple: pizza, salad, pickled okra, strawberry shortcake, and cherry lemonade. That night, the execution staff struggled to find a vein. Nearly 15 minutes passed. Christina stayed calm, silent. Once strapped down, she spoke directly to her children, apologizing for taking their lives, for the pain she caused. Her voice didn't shake. Before the drugs flowed, she said one last thing: "I love you, my babies." Christina Riggs was pronounced dead at 9:28 p.m. She was 28 years old, the youngest woman executed in modern U.S. history. Christina Riggs left behind a case that still divides opinions decades later. Some see untreated mental illness, others see an unforgivable choice. What can't be debated is the loss of 2 innocent lives and the haunting question that lingers: was this justice or tragedy layered on top of tragedy? So what's your take? Drop it in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe. More coming soon.